Good evening and welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to take a couple minutes to let everyone in and then we will get started. Good evening and welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour. We're just going to let everyone in and we'll get started in about 2 minutes. Great. Well, good evening. My name is Tara Johnson-Ohm, and I am a member of the Board of Trustees for Behringer-Crawford Museum. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Northern Kentucky History Hour. It's great to see you all this evening. Really appreciate your continued participation. This is episode 15. It's been a great few months, and I think we've learned a lot about some of Northern Kentucky's history that we don't always have an opportunity to hear about. I hope you've had a chance to maybe check out some of the books from some of the previous presenters. If you've missed any of the previous episodes, you can check them out on Behringer-Crawford's Facebook page and on YouTube. So please do that. Also, just want to give you a couple of additional pieces of information about the museum. We are supported by the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, the Kentucky Arts Council, the Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, and also the Carol Ann and Ralph B. Hale U.S. Bank Foundation. We want to say thank you to all those supporters and also to our members. If you're not yet a member of the museum, we really hope that you'll go to bcmuseum.org and find out more. All right. Also, tonight, everyone is going to be muted, and that does not mean that we don't want you to participate. We actually are hoping that you will interact with us throughout the meeting via the chat feature. If you're not familiar with the chat, it should be at either the top or the bottom of your screen. You can submit questions as Andrew is talking about his book. You can add comments about something, and a little bit later, we will have our now very famous quiz. So you'll be able to respond to the quiz question. The first person that gets the quiz question correct will win bragging rights for sure, and also one of these awesome Northern Kentucky History Hour pins. Many people in the audience tonight should have already received one of those in their mailbox, and you could be next. So without further ado, I am going to introduce tonight's speaker. I am very interested in hearing more about his book and how he decided to write it. We have with us tonight Andrew Young, and he's a historian and a writer who focuses on American criminal and social history, as well as ancient history. He's the author of the highly praised The Lost Book of Alexander the Great, also available from Westholme Publishing. He lives in Greater Cincinnati area with his wife and 2 children. So, Andrew, please get us started.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And thanks to everybody for showing up and through these hard times and listening to me talk about my book and about this story, which maybe some of you already know is about Pearl Bryan. And the case, the investigation surrounding her. So I'm going to bring up my presentation. Okay. So Tara, can you see that just fine?
Yes, it looks great. You do have a little box at the bottom of your screen that you might want to minimize, actually. But other than that, it looks perfect.
All right. Okay, so the title of my presentation is Unwanted, a Murder Mystery of the Gilded Age, which is convenient because that's also the title of my book, Unwanted, a Murder Mystery of the Gilded Age. So a little bit about my book, and then I'll get into the actual story of Pearl Bryan and the investigation, the case, and maybe even a little bit about some ghosts that maybe you've heard about. So, so my book is available on Amazon. It is also available at Joseph Beth bookstores and some of the local Barnes and Nobles. I think I haven't been to any booksellers since the pandemic started, so I don't know for sure that they're still there, but they're definitely available at Amazon and at local libraries if you love libraries like I do. So a little note I wanted to say about the book is that while it is about the Pearl Bryan case and the investigation and the trials, it also delves into some what I would call contextual information that is concerning what is going on in this area and in the country in 1896, which is when this takes place. So there's stuff in there from other cases around this time that are similar that people were comparing this to. Even I talked very briefly about the kind of music that people were listening to. So just keep that in mind that it is about this case, but it's also about what was going on historically in 1896. So now we'll get started with the story. It starts February 1st, 1896. It was Saturday. It was cold and foggy. And John Hewling was on his way to work. He was crossing a field of the Lock Farm and came upon a body laying underneath some bushes. Now, there's a couple different versions of the story, but the gist of it is that he approached the body. The skirts were up over the head. He pulled the skirts down and found that the head was missing. And the head was removed from the body and was never found. So immediately, obviously, calls went out. People were coming to the crime scene or, the scene of where the body was found. And some of the people that came were Campbell County Coroner Tingley, Campbell County Sheriff Plummer, and then 2 Cincinnati detectives, Krim and McDermott. Also, souvenir hunters, curiosity seekers came. In 1896, there was no such thing as CSI. There was no DNA. There weren't fingerprints even at that time that were used in investigation. And there really wasn't a sense that people should not go into a crime scene. There wasn't a feeling among the public that it was bad to disturb a crime scene. They didn't really see anything wrong with it. So people went into the scene where the body was found, took leaves off of trees, branches from trees. They even dug up some of the dirt and took it with them to do I don't know what with, but it was kind of a macabre souvenir collecting. So the big question when the body was found was whether or not the victim was killed there in the field in Fort Thomas or somewhere else. This was especially important because it was a question of jurisdiction. If the murder took place somewhere else, then it wasn't underneath the umbrella of Campbell County. Coroner Tingley felt that the body was dumped there, but Plummer, Krim, and McDermott all felt that the killing had actually taken place there because of the blood that was on the scene. So here's a couple pictures, one of Sheriff Plummer and another of Detective Cal Krim. These two guys really became the kind of famous investigators in the case. The body itself was removed, taken to White's Funeral Home in Newport, and an examination was done. They determined that the victim was a young country girl. Now, how they determined that is kind of open to speculation. probably she was clean. She was well fed. She had on nice, clean clothes, but they weren't fancy clothes that you might see a well to do person in the city wearing. Um, Once again, that's just speculation. But the doctor that did the examination said this is a country girl who's come from the country into the Cincinnati area. Also, it was found that the victim was 4 to 5 months pregnant. This instantly pointed some of the investigators in a direction of a motive, even though they didn't have the identification of the victim yet. Also, the victim was wearing cloth top shoes, which I have a picture of on the next slide, so you can get an idea what those were like. And the victim had distinctive webbed toes. Now, because there was no head, it was very hard to identify this victim because there were no fingerprints, like I said. But they were actually able to identify it, surprisingly. So the cloth top shoes you can see here, this is what they would have looked like. This is not a picture of one of the cloth top shoes. She wore a much smaller size shoe, but you can see that it was pretty distinctive type of shoe. Now, Louis Pook, that's how you pronounce that last name, Pook, was a shoe dealer in Newport at the time, and he became interested in the case. And he went to White's funeral home, and he looked at the victim and found her shoes, which were, of course, interest to him. And he determined they were a size 3, which was particularly small. So he went to Sheriff Plummer and he said, I think I might be able to tell you at least where these shoes were bought. And Sheriff Plummer said, that sounds good. Go ahead and, do your own investigation. So he was able to take one of the shoes, Louis Pook was, and he went to the manufacturer up in Portsmouth, Ohio, was able to determine based off of their records that the shoe and the identification numbers that were on the shoe, that they were sold in Greencastle, Indiana. So, and there was only one size 3 in that particular lot. So Louis Pook contacted Sheriff Plummer by telegraph, told him what he had learned. Plummer, Krim, and McDermott all went to Greencastle, Indiana, after going to the shoe store and then talking to some other people in town. They determined that their victim was definitely Pearl Bryan. She was 22 years old. She was the youngest daughter of the well-to-do Bryan family in Greencastle, Indiana. So what they were able to piece together was that Pearl's cousin was Will Wood, and Will Wood was friends with a man named Scott Jackson. Scott Jackson was actually from New Jersey. He had traveled around quite a bit, and he ended up in Greencastle because his sister was married to a professor at DePaul University, very nice liberal arts university that's there in Greencastle. And Will Wood introduces Pearl and Scott. According to witnesses, they immediately began an affair, a relationship, and was definitely a sexual relationship. The illustration here is from, there were several books that came out after the murder, and this one shows Pearl and Scott Jackson together. This is an invention of the artist and is not based off of any real photograph. There's no photograph of them together or anything like that. So they had their relationship. Then Scott Jackson left for dental school in Cincinnati. And it was not long after that that Pearl discovered she was pregnant. Scott Jackson then according to these witnesses, convinced her to come to Cincinnati for an illegal operation, which was, of course, an abortion, which at this time was very, very dangerous. So when Plummer and Krim and McDermott get this information, they immediately send to the chief of police in Cincinnati for him to get Scott Jackson, who was picked up outside of his boarding house. They arrest him. So that's Scott Jackson on the left there, picture of him. And they arrest Will Wood, Pearl's cousin. But what is determined with Will Wood is that he was probably involved in communicating between Scott and Pearl, but he wasn't actually involved in the murder or what happened when Pearl came to Cincinnati. He wasn't in Cincinnati at the time, so they end up eventually letting him go. Scott Jackson is very nervous and very turns himself around quite a bit when he's talking to the police, and he implicates his roommate Alonzo Walling in this murder while he's trying to say that he didn't have anything to do with the murder. So these men are arrested and kept in Cincinnati, but as I said, because it was determined that the crime was committed in Fort Thomas, they were moved to Newport. Now, the trials begin, and it's a little bit of a circus. Most people are already convinced that Scott Jackson and Alonzo Walling are guilty. The newspapers already call them murderers and fiends and that sort of stuff. So I think it's hard to say that they got a fair trial, but there's a good chance that they were involved in whatever occurred, and if there was a murder, they were probably the murderers. As far as the evidence that we have points to them. So what was at the trial was one of the witnesses was George Jackson, no relation to Scott Jackson. He told a story that on Friday night, the night before the body was found, he was approached by Alonzo Walling and asked if he would drive a carriage for $5. That Alonzo Walling and his friend had a woman that they wanted to get to her home in northern Kentucky. So George Jackson begins to drive this carriage, and he hears what sounds like painful sounds of a woman in the back of the carriage. He attempts to jump off of the carriage. According to his story, Alonzo Walling climbs up to the bench that he's sitting on, pulls out a revolver, and says, keep driving or I'll drive you to hell. And so George does what he's told at gunpoint and drives to Fort Thomas. When Alonzo Walling and Scott Jackson take presumably Pearl Bryan into the woods there into the field, George Jackson bolts and runs back to his house. Now, there's a couple problems with his story, mainly that it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. If Alonzo Walling could sit next to him on a carriage and point a revolver at him, then there's no reason for him to be there. Alonzo Walling could have just as easily driven a carriage. It doesn't take a special license or any ability to drive a carriage. And according to the story, he just picked George Jackson up off the street. So there wasn't anything special about George Jackson that he was chosen. But, who knows in these circumstances. Also at the trials were Will Wood, that's Pearl Bryan's cousin, his letters. Now, he had some letters from Scott Jackson and to Pearl Bryan that, according to Will Wood, implicated them in this scheme to um, get Pearl to Cincinnati and to kill her. The problem was is that Will Wood burned all the letters. So the investigators allowed him to recreate the letters by memory and write them out as if they were really the letters, and then they were submitted into the case as actual pieces of evidence. Um, the there were plenty of other witnesses against Scott Jackson and Alonzo Walling. Many doctors, especially Dr. Carruthers, who performed the examination, one of the examinations on Pearl Bryan's body, that showed that she was pregnant. That eventually Scott Jackson had to admit that that was his baby, but he contended that it wasn't him. It was Alonzo Walling who actually did it. Alonzo Walling said it wasn't me. It was actually Scott Jackson that did it. This defense of not me but him didn't work for them at all. Really, because the implication to most people was that they were involved in it together, that they both knew what the other was doing, and they were there going along with it, every step of the way. So they were both in separate trials. They were both found guilty and sentenced to death. Now, they're after they were sentenced to death, and while they were waiting to be hanged, they both wrote their final confessions. And they both told the same story, which was that they did, that Scott Jackson did get Pearl to come to Cincinnati, but it wasn't to kill her. It was to have this abortion done. And the abortion was supposed to be done by a Dr. Wagner from Bellevue. This Dr. Wagner was a real person. He was a real doctor, and after the Pearl Bryan murder happened, he was confined to an insane asylum for a while. So, according to Scott Jackson and Alonzo Walling, Dr. Wagner botched the operation. Pearl Bryan died. They took her to the field, and Dr. Wagner was the one that removed the head. Now, Dr. Wagner, of course, was questioned about this, and he said he didn't know Pearl Bryan, he didn't know Scott Jackson, he didn't know Alonzo Walling, he didn't have anything to do with any of them. He had never met them or talked about them or had anything to do with them. So, because the trials had already happened, because the death sentences had already been pronounced, and it was all pretty much wrapped up, no one really looked into it any deeper. At the very last moment, it was felt that Scott Jackson could have saved Alonzo Walling's life, in that he could have said, "It was me. I did everything on my own, and Alonzo just knew about it." Alonzo couldn't do the same to Scott. Scott was too, it was the evidence against him was too damning. But the feeling was that Scott could have saved Alonzo. And in fact, Detective Krim states that he was really hoping that that would happen because he believed that Alonzo was kind of this not very bright individual who just did whatever Scott told him to do. So, unfortunately, Scott Jackson did not do that. They both hung in Newport by where they had been staying in the jail. As far as I know, they were the last hangings in Campbell County. So that really wrapped up the story. Um, though, unfortunately, I guess, or fortunately for some people, it seems that Pearl and Scott and Alonzo are not happy to stay dead. Their ghosts have been seen. Pearl's headless ghost has been seen supposedly at her grave site. At her grave, which I have a picture of here, people leave pennies on the grave, heads up, to replace the head that she lost. Also, and a lot of people are familiar with this story because of the ghosts that supposedly haunt Bobby Mackey's Music World. I can't really speak to that. I've never had a ghost experience. I've never never had, in all of my studying of this case, I've never seen anything that definitively proved that there is any type of ghost. I know that there are ghost hunters that have recordings of somebody supposedly saying something, but I really can't speak to that. Um, the one question that I often get when I'm doing things like this is what do I think happened to the head? Because there is this sort of uh, mystique about this macabre mystique, I guess, about what this missing piece. Um, I can say that as far as I'm concerned, it probably ended up in one of two places. One is either an incinerator that was at the dental college that Scott Jackson and Alonzo Walling went to in Cincinnati. There was this large incinerator. There was indications that they had been near it in the period when they would have had the head. Um, and in that case, it would have been turned to ash eventually. And then the place was torn down several years later, so it's lost. The other place that it could have ended up, I think, is in the Ohio River. Um, Both Scott Jackson and Alonzo Walling admitted to taking some of Pearl's belongings and throwing them into the river. So, it's reasonable, I think, that they might have thrown that in there as well while they were at it. Of course, it's probably long gone by now, either way, but you never know. So that pretty much wraps up um, my presentation. I was told to have a quiz question ready, so this is my quiz question. Besides leaving pennies, what else have people done to Pearl's gravestone? Um, so I hopefully that's not too easy to figure out. It'll be nice and difficult. So that wraps up what I have to say. So very excited to hear your questions.
Yeah, why don't we take some questions while everyone is trying to answer the quiz question. So if you want to unshare, and then we will get started with some of the questions. So first of all, there were quite a few here. Let me pull this up. Whoops, hold on one second. There we go. So first of all, let's get started with a little bit of geography. So the farm that you mentioned, or the field, I think you said it was Lock Farm in Fort Thomas.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit, like today's Fort Thomas, generally where that would be?
Unfortunately, things have been moved around so much. Um, I really can't speak to, and I haven't gone to Fort Thomas and actually put my feet on the ground to figure out exactly where. So I can't really say that. So there is a marker that has been put up, um, and I don't know. I've heard that it's close to where the body was found, but not directly at the spot.
Do you mean one of those like official, like brass ones, or just more of like a?
No, I think it's just a sign.
Okay. Okay, well, we'll have to do maybe, Jason French, our curator of collections for Behringer-Crawford, he does a lot of curator chats. Maybe we can convince him to go out and about and find the marker.
That sounds great.
Yeah, wouldn't that be good? So, well, I'm sure he loves being volunteered for things, I'm sure, but that would actually be kind of fun. Okay, so we have some questions about just sort of the investigation for a second. So, do they have, and maybe this is a little extra detail that not everybody wants to know, but in terms of the coroner's investigation, wouldn't they be able to tell if an abortion had been attempted? Maybe they didn't have the science quite like we did, but you would think that they would have been able to know that.
No, they would have been able to tell. The problem is that they wouldn't have reported it. So that probably if I could have gotten my hands on the actual documentation, of the coroner's report, it probably would have told me, but unfortunately those documents don't exist anymore. So in the newspapers, they hinted that there might have been indication, but it wasn't enough. It's not enough to say for sure, unfortunately. But I think that from what I've read, that there's a good chance that they did find some indication that was tried. Now they did also find a decent amount of cocaine in her stomach, but no one was really sure what that was for. That might have been an attempt. It might have been an attempt to poison her, and because of the way that things were back then, you could go into a druggist and buy a thing of cocaine, off the street, and there was no record of it or anything.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good to know. I didn't realize that. What year was this again?
1896.
Okay,
It was a different time.
apparently. Okay. So definitely different record keeping standards at that point. So, where are all three buried is a question that we've gotten.
Okay, so Pearl is buried in Greencastle in the Bryan family plot. Alonzo Walling is buried in Ohio, but it's in an unmarked grave, so there's no way to find it. Scott Jackson, supposedly he wasn't buried. His body was given over to science or something like that. They didn't really keep track.
Gotcha. If anyone wants to check out the chat, there are a lot of comments about where the Locke property was in Fort Thomas. So everybody can check out those. If you haven't answered your question, you still have time to submit that. And if you, why don't you say the quiz question again? I want to make sure we get it right.
Okay, so besides leaving pennies on her grave, what else did people do to Pearl's gravestone?
There we go. Okay. We have a couple guesses, or at least one guess, but just wanted to make sure it was said from the right perspective. So, okay, so we have so many questions. So guys, everybody bear with me as I'm trying. This is probably the most questions that we've ever had. So great job, audience, of being engaged. So Patty would like to know, just again to reiterate, why were the Cincinnati police involved?
Basically because there were no detectives in northern Kentucky. So in order to get people who had done this, investigated a murder, they had to pull from Cincinnati, and the police chief in Cincinnati sent those two guys over, like, see what you can do, and they just got totally involved in the investigation, from the get-go.
Gotcha. Okay, so just one more side note about the location of the log property. Maria, thank you for doing a little research for us on the side here. She says, according to the US Gen website, US Gen website, the log property was where Fort Thomas Avenue joins Alexandria Pike, which is now the site of Woodville School. So awesome. Thank you very much for that.
Great.
Okay, so back to the murder investigation for just a second. What was the official cause of death per the coroner?
So the official cause of death on the death certificate was decapitation.
It was that. Okay.
Yeah.
And did they have any way to officially know if that happened? I mean, I guess they thought that that is what caused her death. So somebody had asked, was it post-mortem? But it sounds like they believe that was the official.
Yeah, that was what actually, according to the investigation, the inquest and everything, what killed her was the actual act of it being cut off, with a small instrument like a knife.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
That is awful. Okay. Let me see here. So 1 minute. I just want to make sure that I have some more questions, but I just want to make sure we get all the questions regarding the investigation before we move on for a second. So lots of awesome comments here, by the way. Okay, I think I have all the questions. We're actually streaming live on Facebook right now as well. So I'm just gonna consult the comments for just a second and make sure. Okay, no, we're good. So let's get to a little bit of a different topic for a minute. And that is, so you're writing about this time period and you had mentioned, that in your book, you're covering kind of like the music of the time and different things like that. What would you say, about, I was very intrigued when you talked about in the beginning when it was completely common for people to just sort of walk into the crime scene and just sort of take things or whatever. What's your thought about like the culture of the time and just I don't know, sort of how people responded to the crime, I guess.
I think that one of the things that really stood out to me was kind of the level of callousness, I guess, towards just the whole case. From my point of view, and maybe I'm 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 too innocent or something, but I doubt that. But yeah, there was nothing to print in it about the violence that occurred. Now, some of the other stuff, the fact that she was pregnant was not widely known, not widely told. Um, you know, there were other cases that I looked into where things like being sexually assaulted and that type of stuff was not really discussed, and it wasn't a big deal. But the violence and the fact that people would come and collect blood, was just, it was gruesome. It was very gruesome.
Absolutely. That's so interesting. That's just interesting about how they wouldn't talk about one thing, but then they would like take things from there. Margaret wants to know, why do you think this story was picked up, nationally? She says like New York Times, etc. So maybe it's just what you already said, but any other thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that first of all, you got to remember Cincinnati at this point in time was a big city. It was one of the most populous cities in the country. And so anything that happened around Cincinnati was going to get a little bit more coverage than if it happened in Indianapolis or Columbus or Cleveland, just because it was bigger. But I think you also have parts of the story of this innocent young girl who gets um, kind of trapped uh, by this devilish man. And that's when you get into like some of the folk songs about Pearl and stuff. That's really what it's about, is like warning young girls of worldly men who would take advantage of them. And I think because of that, it really picked up. And so it was in all the papers. There were even some international coverage of the story at some point. So, yeah, good question.
Yeah, that it's interesting. It just becomes this cautionary tale of the time. Very, very interesting. So, there's a number of comments on here that the bag that Pearl carried with her from Indiana, um, she believes it's at the Campbell County Historical Society Museum in Alexandria. I don't know if you know that for sure.
Yes. Yeah, there is a bag there. I don't know the provenance with that bag and where exactly they got it from. So I can't say, yeah, that's definitely the bag. But if anybody were to have it, it would be there. Um, and that bag, which it would be cool if, you know, we could get people to do like DNA testing and stuff just to see with some of this stuff, because supposedly the head was carried in that bag. Um, and there should be plenty of evidence within that bag um, that would tell us, you know, if we could then match that to Pearl, you know, in her grave or something. At least we could tell, you know, you know that that was the right bag, and that definitely happened. But yeah, the bags there. There's also I think some handcuffs that they have. I don't know if they have them on display right now, but there, I would consider Campbell County Historical Society um, to be the kind of owners of the Pearl Bryan story, really. Um,
Wow, that's interesting. So, but in addition, Blanche mentioned that the head covering that one of the fellows wore, oh, when he was hanged, is actually in the collection at Cincinnati Museum Center. So it sounds like, the the intrigue of that time. I mean, it really caused people. I mean, I guess because they were collecting, some of these things have been held on to.
oh yeah.
Um, so going back a little bit to that sort of national coverage, you had talked about, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your research. And first of all, you've researched some ancient times, right? And now this. What particularly about this story caught your attention and made you decide to write a book about it?
Um, I'd say when I was getting my master's degree at Northern Kentucky University, I had a class with Dr. Paul Tancati, and he kind of we were doing a a thing about the Cincinnati century, like just the 1800s and in Cincinnati, and the Greater Cincinnati area, and he kind of said to us, you know, you pick what subject you want to do. And I've always been kind of into true crime and stuff, and I was like, I want to do crime, you know, like no one ever talks about crime, so let's, you know. And he was like, go for it, and pointed me in the right direction and stuff. And I came across this story back then, and talked to some people about it, you know, in the program, who had known about it, and you know, kind of became aware this is a pretty well-known story. And when I got the chance to write and publish a book, and then I got the opportunity to do a second book, um, it was like kind of a foregone conclusion that I wanted to do this, you know, like I want to like do everything I can to get into the Pearl Bryan story, and every nook and cranny, you know, anything that I can pull out, and tell the whole story from beginning to end. And that's kind of where I got into writing about more than just the story, because I wanted to tell the context, because a lot of it plays into kind of like women's rights at the time, reproductive rights, and that type of stuff that, you know, I felt needed to be explained in order to understand why the investigation took the turn it did, or did this, or why they looked at it like this, and why the public felt this way, and that type of thing.
That's that's so cool. So, okay, so let's keep talking about research for a second. So something like this, I mean, I'm not originally from Northern Kentucky, but I've been here a long time, and I feel like I've heard sort of like whispers about this case from time to time, right? Or like mentions of it. Something like this that has become almost as much urban legend as it is, true fact. How do you go about trying to pull that apart and to try to really figure out what happened?
Well, I I don't think it's easy. Um, I started with, what can I get from the time period? I wasn't interested in any, secondary sources, at least when I first started um, researching it. Really, and what I found pretty quickly was that I was able to get some court documents, the coroner's inquest, the coroner's death certificate that they wrote up, from the Kentucky State Archives. Um, and then there's obviously the libraries around here are amazing, and they have Cincinnati Enquirer, Kentucky Post, Louisville Courier Journal, you know, all these great newspapers of the time. But you do have to approach that with a little grain of salt, because the way that those newspapers are reporting things is a bit sensational. I mean, you're really not going to get away from it. So you have to kind of find the right rhythm to determine what is true, what isn't true, and then when you're going to write it down in a book, it's okay to say, I don't know, but here's what I found.
Mm.
And I think that that's perfectly reasonable, is to present it to the reader like, this is what information was there. There's these conflicting stories. you know i I don't know what to make of it. What do you make of it?
Yeah, interesting. So I have one more, probably the most important question for you, which is, what's your next project?
I actually just finished a book about a possible serial killer in the early 1900s, who unfortunately, though, wasn't around this area. I'm hoping next time I do something, because I just finished this, I'm hoping next time I do something it'll be local, because I love doing local history. But this is it's they call him Billy the Axeman, and it's about that, and it's also about kind of the history of fingerprints that plays into this case, and
Really?
and all that. Yeah.
That that is really interesting. I can't wait to read a little bit more about that. Um, well, I let me check really quick and make sure I haven't gotten any more questions. So I think it's time to reveal the answer to our quiz. So, and maybe you can kind of give a little detail about, like, why are people doing all these things to this poor girl's headstone?
I know. Well, there definitely at least one person got it right, because I saw it. They defaced it. They chipped pieces off of the headstone with hammers.
Really?
Yeah. So why people did this? Why did people dig up dirt with blood on it? I don't. It's something to have. It's a piece of this story, and that gives them physically something to hold on to, and maybe bring out when companies are around or something, to say, here's this. You heard of the Pearl Bryan case? Well, I've got this. But luckily, I don't think people do that anymore. But now her gravestone is just, you can't read anything on it. It's all pockmarked.
Wow, that that is crazy. So as far as our winner, I'm gonna go with actually two this week. Megan Ireland is on a roll. So I don't know if she knows this, but she's actually my neighbor. So I think I'm gonna walk down the street later and bring her her button. And then Miss Mary DeSalvo, congrats. I am also going to mail you a NKY History Hour button. So if you did not put your address in the registration when you registered, please go ahead and send me a private chat, and I will take down your address so we can make sure that we get you your button. So let's see here really quick. Let's see, was that Debbie Blake has one more question for you. In terms of I'm a little bit confused about this question, but in terms of the cocaine that she had ingested, was that ever considered as part of like trying to pin the crime on an additional, a specific person? But it sounds like it was so prevalent that maybe you wouldn't have been able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, really, they basically went to Scott Jackson, said, she's got cocaine in her stomach. Did you do it? And he said, no, it was Alonzo Walling. And they went to Alonzo Walling and said, she's got cocaine in her stomach. Did you do it? And he said, no, it's Scott Jackson.
And then there you go. Gotcha.
And they did that so many times, it just completely undermined any defense, because everyone was like, well, all you're doing is admitting that you collude with each other.
Very interesting. Well, Andrew, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing this story with us. And I hope everybody goes to either Amazon or one of our local book retailers or one of our libraries to check it out. And we're definitely going to look forward to hearing your next local project so that we can feature you again on NKY History Hour. We really appreciate it. For everybody who is watching next week, and Andrew, you as well, I hope that you will join us. We have Dave Schroeder back again by popular demand. He was our very first guest, and he is going to be talking about the tapestry of Covington's neighborhoods, the history of how Covington developed, and stories behind many of the neighborhoods and how they got their names. So we are definitely looking forward to having Dave join us. In terms of Behringer-Crawford Museum, we do have something kind of interesting coming up. So check out the website, bcmuseum.org, or our Facebook page, because just this past weekend, we had a large number of local artists painting in DeVue Park and painting local landscapes. And we will very shortly on, Lori Rish, don't kill me, but I think it's October 4th. And I know you're on here, so if that's not right, then let me know. But we are going to be auctioning those paintings off for an awesome cause, and that's the programming available at BCM. So please, everybody, join us for Fresh Art. This year, it's taking a virtual turn. So while we will not be meeting in person, we will still be giving you the opportunity to get some amazing local pieces for your collection. So bidding actually starts on September 12th and will continue until the final night on October 4th. So with that, we will see you next week for Dave Schroeder. Again, Andrew, so nice to have you. And everybody, take care. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.